All right. Good evening, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm very excited to be speaking this evening with Jean Rocco and Erica Loustau. Erica is the curator for the lobby space at the Delaware Contemporary, curator of some special projects for us. And Jean's work is currently on view. You might recognize Ridem, the large sculpture that is in the museum lobby. So we're really excited to hear from Erica and Jean tonight. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brittany. I'm so delighted that the Delaware Contemporary is able to show Jean Rocco's Ridem sculpture in the main lobby space. It is it's compelling, it's massive, and it's really exciting. Both an exciting combination of content and playfulness, and we're delighted to hear a little bit more from Jean this evening about his history, his process, and his inspiration. Thanks for being with us, Jean.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
We'd love to see some images and hear you talk about your work.
Okay. Well, the image that I have on the screen right now is just sort of some picture I took many years ago that sort of represents where I came from. In the first few years of my life, my family moved around a lot. My father was in the military, but in the formative years, I grew up in the town of Reading, Pennsylvania. And the main industry in Reading, Pennsylvania was a steel mill that was opened in 1889. And my great-grandfather worked there for his whole career, as did my grandfather and his three brothers and some other uncles and cousins. So they made steel at one plant, and then a few hundred yards down the road, they jumped them into car chassis, which is not a real thing anymore. Cars are made differently now than they were then, but you would have these black things that are on the cars, the train cars, was a constant thing that was going out of town, sort of like the big trees in Northern Exposure. Every scene of Reading would have railroad cars full of the steel products leaving town. So this is just a smidgen of the visual inspiration that found itself into my work.
Sure.
This is an early image of my beginning to collect images, and I'll share a bunch of images in this presentation of things that I've found over the years that have somehow informed my image making. So I was just hiking on the mountain with a friend of mine one day. We were in our teens, and I came upon this giant rusty metal disc, and I thought I had found a fantastic sculpture, but it turned out to just be an old tank. So it was a little disappointing, but it again starts to introduce you to my aesthetic. A little later on, I started photographing a lot of machines, and then eventually I started doing portraits of these machines. So here's a portrait of a dual bandsaw with a built-in blade grinder welder that was made out of wood frame and cardboard and styrofoam, and all wrapped in handmade paper. So I enjoyed the juxtaposition of the heavy metal object with the lightness of something that looked almost like it could have been a lampshade. I made a couple of these. This is a pair of railroad car jacks that I also found, photographed, and then worked from the photos. And I did this pair of portraits of these beautiful objects. They were these pieces are about 2 feet by 3 feet square and about 8 feet tall. And again, it's all kind of found materials. I spend very little money on materials for a very long portion of my career. Well, really, all my career. So it's just cardboard and found wall paneling and things like that. But they lose their their original life into the life of the new object. It would really be hard pressed if you were standing next to these sculptures to guess what was underneath the paper that made them look so light. And then finally, the epitome of the paper objects was this 3/4 scale bulldozer that, again, found materials, cardboard, the corrugated material maintained its original shape. I just wrapped it with paper. And it had the combination of the heavy beefiness of a bulldozer and the power that it embraces or encompasses, and then the lightness of the paper.
Jean, can I interrupt your flow here just for a moment? For sculptors, you know, it's not just the form that carries content, but it's also the material choice that carries content. Can you talk a little bit about your material choice here and how the fragility of the paper is carrying perhaps some content here for you?
Yeah, I mean, I became exposed to handmade paper and fell in love with it, and you know, no critique of people who make wall hangings out of it, but my interest and work was always in these objects that surrounded me and had insides and outsides, and in the case of this piece and many others, you could physically get on top of them and occupy the human space that they implied they should have. But I really wouldn't have recognized the value of making something like this out of metal. It would have been as if I were trying to make trompe l'oeil or something like that, as opposed to a portrait done in a playful way, and it has a lightness to it in terms of content as well as the visual characteristic of it. I mean, it's not light literally like a lampshade. These things weighed a lot, but it gives that effect. And you know, if I could, I might make another bulldozer and this time make it hollow and lit from inside, because it would push that idea that much further.
Great.
Okay, then I did a bunch of pieces in wood. This is a piece made all of wood, and it was a pair of pieces of construction equipment. This piece is about 18 inches or 18 feet long, 14 inches tall, and 4 feet wide. And I was beginning to I didn't try to make a piece that people would recognize what the object was. And even back with the railroad car jacks, which I sometimes call first pair, and this I call third pair, you know, you didn't know what that thing was exactly, and it wasn't important. You were hopefully enjoying its aesthetic qualities and imagining things. Like this piece really gave the effect that it could just get up and walk along. Using the inspiration of the items that I found and photographed on construction sites, but being comfortable moving pretty far away from that and not having it anymore be a portrait of an existing thing, but rather a new object unto itself. This is a piece I did that was actually a commission. My wife worked at the Please Touch Museum, and I was aware they were doing a transportation exhibit, and I proposed to them to make a dump truck. And they already had a bus and a boat, so they asked me if I would do an airplane, and I said, sure. So I made a small styrofoam model and gave them a budget, which was ridiculously low, and spent a couple of months crafting this thing out of, it's pretty much 100% wood, making something that would also be safe for kids. And this piece had a long life. The requirements were that it would have to last for a year, because that's the length of time that the exhibit was going to be up. But it lasted about 14 years. It was in the
Wow.
museum. They took it off the floor after a year, and their members said, "Hey, where's the airplane?" So they put it into a place that was kind of off the main floor, but available to people who sought it out. And then it found its way into an exhibit, an outreach exhibit that they did in the Philadelphia airport, and it was there for many years. So I was real happy to have that piece last that long.
Yeah,
And
that's wonderful.
when it disappeared, I contacted the museum and said, "Hey, can I have that back?" And it turns out it was in the office of some corporate donor. So hopefully it's still around. A very fun piece that had all the qualities of the quote fine art that I made, but just made itself available to a whole different kind of audience. Really great
Sure.
experience making that and watching it be used for years. Every time I went through the Philadelphia airport, I went to the place where they had it so I could just have a look at it.
Sure.
I messed around with some figurative stuff, sort of political cartoon type things. And this is sort of an image of a woman and child disrespected. It was supposed to look like they were pushed down, and she was, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but not taking it lightly, I should say. And this is quite a different kind of figure. This is made out of chicken wire, styrofoam, steel pencil rod, uh, floor sweeping compound to give it a texture and paint. Uh, there was a dust mite that was part of a what I call the World Leaders series. I just threw a couple of those in there to show you that I did dabble in that area. So one of the questions that you shared with me was presented by someone in advance of the presentation was about where I get my materials. So certainly I've been collecting materials. My favorite price to pay for things is free, but I will go up to 50 cents if I have to. In all seriousness, I do spend a little money on materials, but I collect materials that I pay almost nothing for. My wife and I are avid flea marketers. I'm a shameless trash picker, dumpster diver. I don't care where it comes from. I have a pickup truck, so it's not uncommon to stop on the way to or from work and throw a couple of metal bed frames or a couple of 2x4s that look like they have some life in them into the truck and bring them home. My studio is very humble, so I do have to oftentimes look at things that have been around for 30 years and haven't gone anywhere and maybe get rid of them to make room for something new that came in. So this I chose to put this image at this point in the presentation because it's a drawer of little wood things. And I did a piece that you can see by looking at it, there are elements of those little wood things used in it. I did this piece. I began this piece when I was home recuperating from some surgery. So I wasn't completely back to my physical abilities yet. So I made all the little knobs and handles. And then I went into the larger object when I was feeling better. There's a close up of that. So a big part of my work is I have a shape I want to create. I have the materials and tools that are available to me, which again are limited, and I figure out how to do it. And sometimes the way the piece looks comes out different because my initial idea was not easily done with my resources. So I changed the design to adapt to what I can do. And of course, over the years, I learned new things and apply them. What I was doing at the time that I made this piece and several of the others in this series was making pieces that were largely wood. So even though I could have used some other materials, I tried to do everything with wood. And the installation of which this piece is part of was called The Other. And what it was about were all the different things in my life that had to be dealt with, respected, honored, that competed with art making. So this one, which was called the Grindstone, represented work, going to work. I'm trying to think what job I had at that time. I've had probably 30 jobs in my life. This one was, I believe I was working at a little manufacturing plant making electronics. This piece is called A Whole New Powertrain, and that's exactly what it is. It's the powertrain of a car. Again, 100% wood, and it represented, you know, in those times of my life, in my 20s, the car was a major element of my life to achieve, to pay for it and the gas and the insurance and repairs and so forth. And I took a lot of liberties with detail. There's details that are there, details that are not there, but the idea gets across. This piece represented home. It was about 3.5 feet tall, maybe a foot in diameter, and a hot water heater. So there's two different representations of home. One is the physical element of the structure, and the other is the nest with 4 birds in it, which represents the inhabitants of the home. That was the hot water heater is 100% wood, but the nest I did use wire to create. This piece, again, I mentioned earlier, at that time I had a medical situation, nothing life-changing, just something that had to be dealt with. So I made an IV. This did involve some metal, but the IV bottle was made out of wood and a plastic hose. And then the main centerpiece of the installation, which was, the title of the piece was called The Other. The title of the installation that involved all the previous several pieces was called The Other. And again, a figurative piece made out of wood of a young man who, by virtue of the apron, has a job to do, and he doesn't appear to be the violinist, but rather someone looking at the violin with wishfulness. The boy is 100% wood. The violin had a little bit of wire involved, and the doily is a doily. I had a rather relatively critical review of this piece, pretty rough review of this piece when I showed it in Louisiana, and the critic sort of criticized me for wasting the time carving out a doily for such a dumb piece. But I didn't. I just glued a doily to the tabletop and painted it, so fooled him. So more finding of objects, finding of images. This is what I came to believe was some sort of a mining vehicle or something like that, that some guy who collected all kind of metal stuff had for sale. There's a for sale sign on it. Gee, I sure would have loved to buy it, but I had to settle with just having the photograph. And this is an image I found online. There's a credit there in the lower right. And it was some sort of a model of a space shuttle out of wood that was taken in Russia. I don't know any more about it, but I just love it. Some more imagery of found things. I'm not like as obsessive as some people might be with their collections, but I do collect things and put them in drawers and cabinets and keep like items alike, and I don't have to think twice about, do I have a piece of formable metal hose that can be used to make something? Sure, I know exactly where it is in my studio. It's in this drawer with all other stuff just like it. Some more objects. This is in a closet of heavy metal stuff. And here, this is just the normal place that the helicopter appears in my slide presentation. So, you know, I'm collecting stuff for years. I'm collecting images. I'm thinking about the helicopter. I actually started this piece and moved a couple of times and had to leave it, and then started it over again later. So it was an image that really had power for me, and I stuck with it, not only for the time it took to collect the materials and get it started, but also for the time it took to make it. So the the pieces all have narratives for me, and I hesitate to share the narrative because I would rather that other people bring their own narratives to it. But just in a general sense, I believe that this piece and the other pieces in this series, which I'll show a few more pieces of, conjure the idea of a youth by virtue of the size of them. They're too small for an adult. And that it must be quite a creative and precocious youth that felt like they wanted to support the defending of their country enough to build a helicopter to their own scale with whatever they had around them, which could involve any number of materials. The afterburners on the jet engines are made of 4-slice toasters, which many people delight in discovering. There are pieces of a glider that used to be my grandmother's and a spaghetti pot that my wife and I used for years before it got relegated to the studio. So all these stories, the imagined story of the creator of the object, the real story behind the objects, the story of how this thing fits into my body of work and the body of artwork in the world at large. It's not uncommon for me to see something that looks, hey, that's pretty much just like my artwork. I have no illusions that I'm creating something that's so original that no one ever did it before. But obviously, it's totally original in that nobody ever did it like I did it. This also might be a good point to mention that in the earlier work that you saw earlier in my career, I would make these pieces sometimes very large, difficult to move, difficult to show, and then I'd throw them away. So as my career progressed and I got into what in hindsight is the second half of the career to this point, I made an effort to figure out a way to keep the work. So a number of the later works I still own. Some more close-ups. There's a funny story about this. A woman who was, I don't know, somewhat older than I am now, so I guess I can call her elderly, asked me, where did I find that the wonderful tiny little airplane dashboard? So I had to say that I made it out of a bunch of junk. It's not real. But they're all different. People bring all different kind of experiences to the work, and some people believe they can function. They believe that this helicopter can fly and that dashboard is real. And then you always have people at the other end of the spectrum. There's inevitably an engineer that says, oh, for instance, and I don't know if you can see my pointer, but in this area here, he said, oh, you hooked up a hydraulic line to an electric horn. So that really wouldn't work. No, Mr. Engineer, it wouldn't really work. It's just a juxtaposition of different items to create a new image that is, in this case, a portrait of a real thing, which is an Apache helicopter. So you mentioned to me before we started that somebody had asked about my earliest experience with a helicopter. And I struggled to think of it. I don't know what my earliest experience is, but I certainly have some stories. I worked at a helicopter company after I made this helicopter. So that was pretty interesting, into these giant hangars, and there's the real thing. And it was Sikorsky, so they made military helicopters. And one night, part of my job was to travel to different sites. I went up to a Sikorsky location in New York State, and they were behind schedule on approving aircraft, and that all the Sikorsky facilities are finishing locations, meaning that the last step in the process is a pilot comes and flies them. So for whatever number of nights I was up there, 2 or 3 nights, I was kept up all night by the extremely loud noises of the helicopter because I stayed in a hotel right next to the airport. Never did that again. And another story that's much more brief is that one time there was this story about an Apache helicopter that had a problem and had to land in a suburban backyard somewhere in like Lancaster County or something like that. And my only thought was, why couldn't it land in my yard? I do still I get just as excited today if 4 Apache helicopters fly over my house as I would have done 50 years ago. Some of the elements in I don't try to do like these people who make models of ships at 1/12 scale and everything has to be perfect. That's not it at all. I'm just trying to get the facsimile of it. But I do really appreciate the aesthetics of the articulating mechanisms that allow the rotor blades to move. And therefore I try to reproduce that kind of look. And again, for those people who take the time to really look closely, they'll determine fairly quickly that, yeah, this thing isn't real. But it doesn't matter. It's, as I say, I'm not trying to do it in a trompe l'oeil kind of way. I'm trying to do it in an homage, more of an homage kind of way. These two, I chose to add details of these 2 elements, the main rotor and the tail rotor, because they're some of the most exciting parts of the aircraft to me.
So, Jean, if you're trying to do this in an homage kind of way with a whole lot of respect, as maybe an enthusiastic adolescent might do. You were talking earlier about the narrative maybe component of that. So what does that mean when this beautifully articulated helicopter also has the suggestion of weapons?
Yeah, it's a dichotomy. I mean, this piece, one time I proposed to show it at a university and the operations manager poo-pooed it because he said, you can't have that there. It's got ammunition on it. Yeah, it is a tough thing. I mean, these Apache helicopters do horrible things, but they also can fly upside down and backwards at 180 miles an hour. That's pretty cool too. So I don't want to paper over the fact that they're machines of war, and most wars should have been avoided. And most of the casualties in war are not the soldiers who chose to go there, but rather, civilians. So I do have those conversations with people when I talk about the piece, and I expect people to have those conversations. And if there are people that are extremely on the dove side of the hawk dove spectrum, I would hope that they could appreciate the fact that by my making this representation, this homage to this object, that it allows them to have the conversation, perhaps with someone on the hawk side of that conversation, while they're both standing there in the museum looking at this, let's face it, big piece of future scrap. So yeah, I think of that, but I don't try to direct the conversations to their end.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Just a little bit about the finding of materials and the process. This piece has a piece here, this thing that I chose to use as the shroud for part of the mechanism that makes the rotor spin. And that came off a pressure washer. So one day I needed to move the helicopter. I guess it was on sawhorses and I needed it on the floor or something. So I walked around the neighborhood and grabbed a couple of neighbors. And the one guy came over and said, "Oh, does it fly?" I said, "No, it just, or is it gonna fly?" This was while it was in process. "No, it's just art." And he said, "Oh, I have something you could use." And he gave me a pressure washer. And sure enough, this element here, he solved the problem for me. And I took the motor from the pressure washer and put it in the fuselage of the helicopter, and it's the motor of the helicopter now. So that's just an example of how serendipitous coming upon objects can
Sure,
affect the look of the piece. But by
sure.
the same token, I had collected a couple of toasters for years, and I was going to use 2-slice toasters, and I decided they wouldn't work. And then I went on a mission to find 4-slice toasters. And I don't mean I went to Walmart and Target, because obviously I could have gotten them there. No, they had to be nearly free. So that's just sort of how my process works in different ways. And I'm working on these things for years, so I can put into my mind, I need a set of 4 wheels that needs to be about 20 inches in diameter, and they need to have some sort of patina of age, because I'm not going to be able to paint them. And then, it might take me a year to come upon those wheels. Unless I can't proceed any further without them, then I make it my mission to get them in the next couple of weeks or whatever. So that it sort of answers the question about the finding of the materials. Oh yeah, and there's armaments in this, and I make fun of them. These rockets are made out of tin cans, and while the bullets are real, they're shot out of a Gatling gun that's made out of cookie tins, and uh, it's not meant to be serious in that way. Any other questions about the helicopter, because it's sort of the center of attention today?
Not right at the moment.
This is an image of some person that collected images of antique medical equipment, and this is some sort of a anesthesia delivery device or something like that, but it fit right into my aesthetic, so I just took the picture offline, printed it 8x10, and hung it on the studio wall. Similarly, I found a book somewhere. I know I didn't buy it because it's all waterlogged and warped, but it was a book of probably 100 different engines only for World War II era aircraft. Fantastic. Later, my wife and I went to the Air and Space Museum Annex in Virginia, and I took a whole bunch of pictures of more aircraft engines. So I have a huge collections of images of aircraft engines. And to me, these things are just absolutely beautiful. I could just do a portrait of one of these engines and put it on a pedestal. But I've done portraits of 2 engines in my 2 more recent pieces. So that's the form that takes. Some more collections. I'm relatively organized, but not super organized. I have this cabinet that has 28 drawers in it, and this is 4 of those drawers, and they have dividers in them. And it's not uncommon when I'm trying to solve a problem where I open all 28 of the drawers to see what's in there, what can help me solve the problem, as well as walking around the studio and opening cabinets for other places. This is just all plumbing stuff. Again, I rarely go to Lowe's or Home Depot and pay $4 for a brass fitting. Rather, I buy them 4 for $1 at the flea market. Or if I'm lucky, I find them in a box on the side of the road. And my organization style requires that I collect a bunch of different cans. So constantly rotating cans in and out of this collection of cans. And sometimes they become part of the art object. So this is a piece called Aquatic in Nature. It's meant to fit into a series with the helicopter, and just a different small person. Maybe it's not a kid, maybe it's just a little person that built this out of the materials at hand to go exploring in the ocean. This is not a military type submersible device. It's an exploratory one. And I added a picture here that shows it in a gallery setting to give you a little better idea of the scale. So that I don't know that person. He's just somebody who was there at the show, but he's probably 6 feet tall. So that's the gives you a good idea of the scale. And you see the not very elegantly wired electric cord there, and that's because the piece lights up. It's another view. This piece you cannot get into, at least not very easily. The door gives you the impression that you can open that door, and if you're small enough, you can get in there. And you'll notice there are two windows in the front, 2 windows on the sides, and this is a view of the interior. you get a completely different view, which only represents roughly a quarter of the interior through each window. So you have to look through all 4 windows to experience the interior and imagine yourself in there. And, you know, same sort of questions can arise as would have for the helicopter. One of my favorite aspects of the interior here is not the engine, although it's okay. It's the air duct on the ceiling up here. Just the way that came together was completely not drawn out on paper. It's just a function of the various elements that I had laying around to make it, and I just enjoy that part. And I would imagine different people enjoy different things. A lot of people mention the toolbox that I made to sit there to hold imaginary tools. A couple of more found objects. This person collected adding machines and took the shrouds off them and photographed them, and I find them quite beautiful. There's a second one. And I'll look at that and just get an idea for maybe just one shape that I'll reproduce, put into something. This is an image, again, inexplicably from Russia, and it's supposed to be an abandoned control panel for some sort of a giant industrial complex. And obviously it's been flooded. So I have a nice collection of gauges. I'm always picking up gauges and looking at them. And when they cost $15, I leave them there. But if they cost $5 or less, it's mine. This piece is called Reliquary. And a reliquary is an architectural element that would be created to go into usually a church or some other place of worship to present the tiny remains that that church owns of a holy person. Now, I chose to make my reliquary look a lot less religious and a lot more industrial. And if you look in this little area here where you have the yellowish light, I'll show you a detail of that. And within there is situated the holy relic. And I've got it hooked up to some alligator clips that are hooked to wires and appear to be electrodes to give the impression that the creator of this sculpture or this object, this machine, intended to reanimate the biological matter within. It's a combination of a couple of interesting concepts for me. It's a rear view, and you see there the 2 doors that are open and inviting you to look deeper within. A couple of lights on this piece, and this is just a shot of that inside cavity that appears to provide a multiplication of force to be able to develop the power that it takes to do the function of this object. This is a piece that's in process, so don't look at it as a finished sculpture. But I'm often asked what you're working on now. This is what I'm working on now. We hope to finish this piece later this year. And it encompasses a lot of similar elements to the other work, but it's not going to be completely wrapped in metal. There'll be a lot more of the exposed metal that you see there. And I've collected and chosen galvanized materials with patinas that fit together, and a lot of the structure is bed frames, and I don't try to change the patina that they came with. And then other elements are made afresh. This one of the most expensive things I ever purchased to make sculpture with was a piece of copper for $100. Half of it there that encompasses that tank. And this piece is sort of Frankensteinian combination of a 1930s cigar racer sports car and a 1930s earth mover. I was thinking of making one or the other piece, and I just thought, well, why not make them both as one? This is just a picture of the fuselage on the work table, getting its metal applied so you get an idea of the wood structure, the armature around which I wrapped the metal, and the helicopter was made this way. submarine was made this way, and the Reliquary was made this way. It's my current
Yeah.
method of working.
Yeah.
And finally, I just took, I don't, it's difficult to photograph my studio. It's a 2-car garage that performs other domicile functions as well as my studio. It's not very big, but I have what I need there. And these are the tools of the trade. I just stopped one day at the end of the day, took a picture of exactly what the workday will look like after I had been working for 4 hours. There's no
Yeah.
staging there whatsoever. That's it. So those are the tools of my trade when I'm doing the metalworking function. I do
Yeah.
have a couple of pieces of home use level woodworking equipment, and I have a little buzz box welder, again, a home use style thing that I use. I'm fortunate that over the years, I've built a studio that allows me to make these objects.
Yeah. Wonderful.
I believe that's the end of the slides. I'm happy to go back to any of them, answer any questions.
Thank you, Gene. This is so rich and wonderful. Thank you. I had a question about, there have been lots of questions about your materials and how much you collect, and where your materials come from, and sort of the history. But I'm kind of interested in the idea of patina. So some of your objects and materials are newer, and some have some wear and history on them. And can you talk a little bit about the idea of patina, or like the evidence of history on a material, and how you make choices about how to use that material?
Mhm. Well, I'm fortunate that this is why I start the presentation with the image of the city of Reading. I'm fortunate that Reading is in a former Rust Belt area. There are a lot of surplus places. There's a very good surplus place just a few miles up the road, and probably no less often than 10 times a year, I go up there wanting something and coming home with the thing I wanted plus a whole bunch of other stuff. And everything's stored outside. So perish the thought of the day when I can't get a piece of aluminum that's already been weathered and
Yeah.
have to
Okay.
somehow do something to it because I wouldn't like it if it were all shiny. And having it be all shiny would put a highlight on my craftsmanship, which is not, the level of a true sheet metal craftsman. Any sheet metal craftsman will tell you I'm a hacker. So you can be forgiven a lot of errors. If the screw gun slips and I put a hole in the wrong place, I just throw another screw in it and nobody knows I didn't mean to put it there. So I like that aspect of the materials. I like the fact that these bed frames are all different colors and they're all old and worn. And I'll be honest, sometimes I'll go in there with a little bit of extremely watered down acrylic paint in a brown or black and kind of give it a little bit of age that way, but it's not a
Sure.
big part of my work.
Yeah.
The patina on this sheet metal here came with the piece of sheet metal, as
Yeah.
did all the other.
Yeah.
But I have sheet metal that looks a lot better, and if I can avoid using it, I won't use it because I prefer the patina that was truly created by the elements, years of being
Sure.
in the elements.
Yeah.
So that's just sort of how I approach it. If you look at a piece like this, when it's finished, you might think of a rat rod, if you're familiar with that. A rat rod is a reconditioned old car, and they try to make it maintain the patina of age, but they want it to run too. So it's got working gauges, and if you look closely, you'll see those are some brand new nuts and bolts. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I couldn't find 18 used bolts that were all exactly the same color. But hey, you know what?
Right.
Sometimes I do, and boy, is that great when that happens.
Sure.
Where's that? Oh, I was going to zoom in. I'm not seeing the zoom tool. Oh, I have to pull the photo out. But right here and here, you see some of these giant bolts. I got several lengths, several 6-foot long lengths of this 1-inch diameter threaded rod and just a huge bucket full of bolts for it, all aged to perfection. So that's a great
Wow.
find. And
Wow.
that's something that, I'll keep for decades and just draw from.
Sure.
And, I didn't go looking for that. Oh, I want a 6-foot long piece of 1-inch threaded rod. I would never even imagine that one existed. But when I saw it, I grabbed it up. And I pay for this stuff by the pound. If I were running a business and I ordered it from another business, it might have cost $75. But because I got it up at the scrapyard, it cost $6.
Right. Right. Wow. Thank you. This has been wonderful, Jean. Thank you so much for sharing your work and your process.
I'm honored that you take the time and that somebody else might take the time to view the video when it's up. And I'm easily reached by you Google my name or go to my website, which is my name, and happy to answer questions by email that way. Very open about the way that I work, and hope some people find it, I don't know, inspirational, educational, something that they might use to do their work.
Wonderful. That's great.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much, Erica and Jean, for being in conversation this evening. And we're so excited for Ridem to be at the Delaware Contemporary through the spring until April 25th. And hopefully visitors will get a chance to come out and see it up close and experience the work in the museum. And we really appreciate all of your expertise and insight this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Brittany.